You can go whenever you want to go. So let's just, I'm going to get up, we're going to say something here, we're going to get up, then you're just going to follow me through there, we're going to go into the upstairs room.
Steve, we just made a commercial for the Jeep.
That's what we do, isn't it?
You see, when there's no time, we have to make time in life. This was a genius idea now. This is even better.
Go back 10 minutes when I first suggested this, and Cyrus's reaction was like, yeah, it's a great idea. Pissed off, walks off.
Then I think about it.
Yeah.
Then I think about it and I say, oh shit.
It's actually brilliant. It's brilliant.
Hello everyone. We're pleased to be joined today by Steve Matchett and this beautiful NSX. We're going to go over the vehicle and see what brought its development. There's a lot of Formula One ties, and Steve, I think you know a lot about Formula One, so you were probably around. No, I'm going to take that back. I'm going to say guaranteed to be around when this car was being developed and being test driven by the famous guys and the development team. Honda has been involved in Formula One for a long time, and
right.
So this car came to the US for many, many things, but Honda, you know, eventually went from Formula One to a race car or a road-going car, and this is the result of that.
Yes, my memory of the NSX, Marcel, was from Suzuka in '91 when I was racing with Benetton. But go back a year before that, I have a very strong connection to Suzuka because my first race win as a member of Benetton Formula One team was in Suzuka in 1990.
Is that so? Really?
Yes, and it was a direct result, that win, with all due respect to the engineers and driving capability of everyone that was surrounding Benetton. That win came around because of Ayrton Senna.
Ayrton Senna?
Yes, and he was in a great rivalry. One of the great stories of Formula One history is a rivalry between Alain Prost and Ayrton Senna. And in 1990, they had a coming together at turn one.
They collided?
At turn one, and both drivers were out of the race at turn one. And this was predicted before the start of the race. Senna was absolutely incensed with what had been going on in Formula One, and this rivalry was building and building and building. And if I remember the story right, Senna said, whatever happens in turn one, I am not lifting. Right, something to that effect. And they went into turn one, pushed both Prost and Senna out, but that left the track open for Nelson Piquet and Roberto Moreno, who was driving our second car. So both of the Benetton cars finished 1-2 in that race. It was an absolutely incredible result for me.
Part of your team, yeah.
It was my first year in Formula One. The first victory with Benetton was Suzuka in '90 as a result of that.
Awesome.
Direct result of Ayrton Senna. And as you were talking about earlier on, Senna has a great connection both to Honda and more specifically in this case with the NSX, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stories and a lot of things we can see online. And there's also a reason why I'm dressed not as a Bible salesman today, but I'm doing the homage to Senna and his loafer video, homage to it, when he was heel toeing and just shift and fast footing.
Yeah.
The story goes, as far as I know it, he was on track at Suzuka testing his McLaren Honda car, and the engineering team for the NSX happened to be there and said, hey, would you give our car a go? And he said, nope, I'm no good at production cars. I don't know how to drive them well. I can't give you any feedback. You know, I'm no good at that. Please, you're a driver. You must drive this. And so they give him the keys. He drives it around, drives 2 laps, and he comes back and he says, don't be offended, but I'm just going to give you my feedback. I think the car is very fragile.
Okay.
And the Honda team took that to heart, and they were very upset at that. And they said, we must make this car stiffer.
Yeah.
And just from that feedback, the car got 40% stiffer. You know, there's a whole bunch of engineering and development stories that got the car to production, but Honda was dead to nuts set on making this car out of aluminum, which back then it hadn't been done before.
Yeah.
You know, so they had a lot of mass manufacturing argument with the provider of alloy to get this car into production. Again, there was kind of no real guide of how to do it. Cars were steel bodied and half aluminum by this point. So when Honda came into it and said, I need to mass produce an alloy car, this was kind of the first for the cars to come in the future.
So there's 2 main reasons, my understanding, for excuse me, wanting to use aluminium in a car, whether it's an old race car or a current road car, in this case the NSX. Ali is a lighter material than steel. We all want everything to be as lightweight as possible. There's great advantage to that in racing, that a light car is a fast car. But also, what you have to be concerned with that, and I'm going to pick up Senna's already you've already told me what Senna's comments were. Senna would be concerned about the stiffness of the car.
Stiffness, yeah.
Because what you don't want ever, in an ideal world when you're developing a chassis, you don't want any flex between the front and the rear. You want it as stiff as possible.
Yeah.
You want the suspension to control the car, and you have to try and remove the flex. Now, I have a strong magnet in my pocket here.
Oh, okay, this is great. This is a good visual.
I'm going to just use this just to protect the paintwork on the car. But this, Cyrus, if you come around here, find a piece of steel.
Right there, that fender is good.
Here, this is steel. Okay, we can hear it clicking as it makes contact. Let me just put this down to protect it. There's nothing. There's nothing. There's nothing all around the bodywork. So the entire body of the car, not just the chassis frame, the entire body of the car is made of alloy.
That's kind of a first for manufacturing, especially mass manufacturing like Honda.
Yeah, I mean, some of the smaller manufacturers, Ferrari, for example, have been using alloy on cars.
But it was never the whole car.
But it was not like that. It's a very expensive material to be using, and it's also, alloy does tend to, if it starts to fret, it will start to break.
Steve,
So you have to try and get around that. Here's small steel. Yeah. So you've got steel on this connector between the two rear suspension struts, which is just
strut bar strength, yeah.
just to try and put a bit extra strength in there. There's your steel, but again, there's nothing around here.
Yeah,
There it is.
And the whole monocoque, especially underneath it, the whole thing is the same way. Now, one thing I do remember hearing about is this car was developed in the late 80s.
Yeah.
The first manufactured year was 91. This is the 91. And they have two effective kind of, not facelifts, but they have two series of them. But at any rate, I remember hearing in the late 80s, they would take Ayrton Senna's lap and they would see where he would say, hey, it got very flexy here, it was very loose here.
Yeah.
And they would input that data and send it over to the guys in Japan, and they would then put it in their computer, and this computer would sort out where it could go, where the stiffening of the chassis could get added onto without going excessive on the weight. Because Honda's whole effort in this was to make a car that would compete, this was benchmarked to the Ferrari 348. Could compete with, let's say, with less power, but still the same track possibilities.
Right.
And so
the power to weight ratio is vital.
Very vital. And all these development of these engines, the suspension, the chassis, all that was, especially for Honda back in the day, this was way out of their league, if you will.
Yeah.
It took a lot of development to make this engine happen as well, because I think by the late 80s there was also the gentleman's agreement in Japan where they all agreed not to go over 276 horsepower.
Okay.
So they also couldn't overdevelop the power rating on this car. For the US, we got 250. And we brought it in this package, which is a V6, all aluminum, which is, again, one of those other things. No Japanese or any other manufacturer outside of Ferrari, maybe even Aston Martin, they don't have alloy engine. They always had a steel block or steel heads and aluminum block, or some sort of combination. And this one got titanium connecting rods, titanium pistons, and later on it became a blueprinted engine when they did the Type R and the Type S. And that would allow it to go into 8,000 RPM range. Here, it only goes to 7,500 RPMs. But, they did refinements, and this was kind of the first generation that got us there, It's really cool to see that.
When you look at the car and you see what Honda produced in terms of engineering of the car, they've done a remarkable job. And I've heard that Gordon Murray, legendary Formula One designer Gordon Murray, who spent so much time at McLaren and also worked on the road car project, the first McLaren road car project, and off now Gordon Murray's doing his own road cars. But he was so impressed with the engineering of this car that he used a lot of the inspiration for his future work, and he also had an NSX, I think, in his own personal car. But in terms of engineering the car, and again, working with Senna and Honda and Senna's great Formula One knowledge, everything that they've done on this car makes perfect sense, right? You want to try and we talk about it all the time in racing, you want to try and get the mass of the components to be as close to the center line as possible. Well, In an ideal world, that's a perfect solution, but of course you've got to get a driver in there. So you can't have the mass of the components mounted here because we've got to get the driver in the cockpit. You try and get as close to that as possible, and you want the components to be as low down in the chassis, as close to the road or as close to the track, because that improves the handling of the car as well. And that's exactly what Honda managed to do with that. So they have a relatively powerful engine, lightweight, as you said, to get that mass down as low as possible, reduce the mass, and then drop the mass physically as low in the car as possible. They did a great job there. And I imagine, I've never driven the car, you've driven the car.
Oh yeah.
I imagine you get in a very neutral handling car. I bet this handles extremely well.
It is so poised, very comfortable, even well dampened. One of the things that I feel like they also had to do is this forward monocoque design, you know, it has its origins from Pininfarina. We'll talk about that in a little bit, because this car was eventually the evolution of the prototype car called the HPX, which is Honda. It's HSX, which is Honda Supercar X for unknown or extreme, which was designed by Pininfarina, and the cab forward design was done because they wanted to have great visibility all around. The Italian cars of the days, the 348s, 328s, huge blind spot on the C-pillar. Honda said, none of that. We want this to be fighter jet style. And you could see nowadays everybody has fighter jet theme in their cars, but in the late 80s, early 90s, to have a cockpit that's focused on you and have all the dash controls and all that, just goes to show you they were thinking about being solely about the driver. They didn't care about much else. So the drivability, visibility was huge for them. And in conjunction with all the suspension and all the chassis bits and the way they constructed the whole car, and obviously since the Honda had to be practical, they made it with a major trunk, which no other car really had at that time, especially an exotic car or Italian car. So
remarkable. It's a note. The Lambretta sounds like nothing else. Vespa's a little similar, but to me, the note is unique to Lambretta. I like the Lambretta engineering. It's a very cool, very stylish machine. I'll be sorry to see it go, because again, it's been with me for 10 years, but I'm very pleased to see it go to a new home, to a new custodian, someone that's going to take care of it and love it for another 10 years and beyond. And that is how we know with relative certainty that if ducks float, well, they must be made of wood. Join us again next week for another episode.
Italian car. So
remarkable. It's a remarkable piece of engineering, and it's an icon. It's become an icon. It's a legendary car. And again, my experience with Formula One, I can remember Senna and the NSX and the Honda partnership being a huge tie-up, you know, partnership. And of course, you know, remember, I was working for a different organization. I was working with Benetton and had no direct connection to Honda or McLaren or to Senna, and yet that news was
knew about it, right?
It was filtering down the pit lane that this was a big thing. And you also have to remember, at the time when Senna was driving for McLaren but using Honda engines, I don't think, certainly in my mind, there's no doubt that Senna's celebrity was as big in Japan as it was in Brazil. Obviously, he had a huge following in Brazil, a Brazilian driver, Brazilian world champion, remarkable man and remarkable sporting talent, and a huge celebrity and a star in Brazil. But that also carried over to Suzuka and to Japan. When we used to go to Suzuka, typically it was the second to last race on the calendar and we'd finish the season in Australia. But when we went to Suzuka in October, November, for that what was called the penultimate race, the second to last race, the stands were absolutely full to breaking point with fans. And I do remember there was these stories that such was the clamour for tickets to see Senna and McLaren and Honda racing that they had to raffle off the tickets. Not just to raffle off the tickets, you had to be in a raffle to win the chance to buy the ticket.
So that was
such
the buzz that it had,
There was just way more folks that wanted to go than tickets available to fill Suzuka. So that connection with Honda and Senna was colossal, and to get that commercial tie-up and to get Senna's feedback into this car It's a remarkable achievement, and again, it filtered down the pit lane instantly. And here it is. It's great to see it.
Yeah, it's an icon developed by the time and also the celebrities around that.
Yeah.
Because whether it was a marketing ploy or not, Senna had a huge direct impact in it, and that's how it was brought to the world. You know, like I said, in the 80s, Honda didn't really have a direction for anything that could compete, and they wanted something that could do that. That I told you that Pininfarina tie-in with that Honda prototype unknown, that HPX, was the beginning of them going, hey, that looks okay. Let's make it a real car. Let's make it a viable car. And then, you know, being involved in Formula One, Honda's been around since when, 60s?
Since we're in the 60s, yeah.
60s, right?
Yeah, my old colleague, former F1 colleague David Hobbs drove for Honda in the 60s, yeah.
So you see, they're at this point, they have a couple of years of expertise and then a little bit of know-how, so carrying some of that over into a road-going car. I mean, I remember them having very big challenges about making an engine that would produce the power, because up to this point, it was all economy cars-based stuff, so they needed to do something more radical. You want to hear something crazy? This engine still is alive and well today in every Honda Pilot, every Honda Odyssey that exists out there. It's a 3.5 variant of this, which later on, you know, became everybody's daily vehicle. Every Acura, every Honda has it now, but it started here.
When I started out my career, Marcel, as a mechanic, I was taken on board as a Mazda apprentice, not working on Honda, but working on Mazda. But the thing that always sticks with me about working on Japanese-built cars was their ease of maintenance. Complete contrast to when I was working with Ferrari, which, you know,
Afterthought?
Right, but when you're working on Japanese cars, Honda or in my case with Mazda, you needed half a dozen spanners, wrenches, 10 mil, 12, 14, 17, 19, and the car would fall apart, right? It's all it was. It was designed to be very serviceable, designed to be mechanic, engineer friendly.
Yeah.
Everything in its place and a place for everything. Once again, in sharp contrast to what was happening in Britain at the times with Jags and, you know, awful reliability problems those cars had. But you can see it now, looking around the NSX. It's designed to be worked on. Yeah. Everything is form and function.
Yeah, and their reliability and drivability efforts is what forced all the exotic car manufacturers to actually step their game up and make their car more reliable.
Yeah.
After this car for Ferrari, the 355 was their answer to them. And that car was significantly way more powerful, but also a car that you could actually, you know, later on after that one, it became more workable because the 355 is very hard to maintain. But here, the timing belts are accessible through the side of the car. Valve covers are right there. There's nothing really jam-packed in there.
Even looking from here, Marcel, we look down into the engine bay now. If you had a 10 mil,
we could take more than half of it apart.
Most of it would fall off, right?
Yeah.
We can see all the bolts around here on the suspension strut and down onto the fuel injection, down onto the other side here with all the control boxes. Again, half a dozen wrenches and the thing would fall apart.
Looking at this, being a car of 30 years old, it looks like a car that you'd see today because they set the blueprint for cars that could be worked on, be reliable, and I mean, like I said, this architecture still exists now.
Yeah.
So it's a car that, you know, they didn't make one off, they made thousands off later on, and this was kind of the beginning of it.
I love the positioning of the alternator, how it's just sat between the banks of cylinders to the left and right. Isn't it wonderful?
Practical.
Yeah.
Practical, drives off the pulleys right there, ready to go. If it was a Ferrari, it'd be off its own side of its own pulley, and you'd be, you know, wasting some momentum.
Would it take you
there.
3 days to take the panels off and the ancillaries off to be able to see the alternator? If I'm not, most other manufacturers got involved with it. But again, that's that Japanese approach to engineering was so different to what was happening in many other parts of the world.
Yeah, and you would argue that they never got as crazy overdeveloped in their engines as the Italians did or the British did, but you got to think what their homage is. Their homage is reliability, drivability. That's their claim to fortune. So they wanted to give you a car you could get in, drive cross country, not be hurt, not be unreliable, and also have enough space for everything. And certainly driving this car with 28,000 miles is a great example of what a car that's supposed to be tight and brand new feels like.
You just reminded me of a story. I can't remember which race it was now, but certainly in my time of working in F1, when Honda had experienced an engine failure in the race.
Someone got taken out to the back and beaten.
The race escapes me, but out the back of the McLaren garage, after the race, I remember there was a big huddle of all the Honda mechanics and engineers from the race team, and honestly, it looked like the end of the world had arrived for them. They were in absolute shock that their engine had failed. I remember thinking, wow, this, if you want a sort of snapshot of the dedication, the professionalism of the engineering input that goes into Formula One, there it is. That's what happens when it goes wrong. And it was just like the end of the world had arrived. So when you talk about reliability, it is absolutely at the forefront of what Honda were doing and are continuing to do.
Yeah. Steve, I remember hearing that Honda got its roots started in automotive manufacturing through motorcycles.
Right.
And in the beginning, when they first started their first cars, they were seen as cheap, unreliable Japanese vehicles. But because that reputation is what led them, they said, something about the head gasket being the biggest failure point of their cars. So from then on, they said, we're gonna get together, we're never gonna have a head gasket ever go bad again. We're gonna underperform our engines, but they're gonna last and they're gonna be the most reliable ever. And ever since then, if there's any sort of reliability or a long-term effects of their engines, you basically get ejected and then start all over again. Because their homage, again, it's all about making it the most reliable.
It's all about reliability. One of the most brilliant minds I ever had the pleasure and honor to work with during my time in the sport was Ross Brawn. He's now effectively running the technical side of Formula One. He was the technical director at Ferrari after he left Benetton. But I have a good relationship with him. I've worked with him for years. But when Ross Brawn first arrived at Benetton, the first thing he instilled in all of us, from the design department up in the eaves of the building down to the race mechanics assembling the cars, was reliability. Don't build anything that's fast but unreliable.
You can't win races if you don't make it.
There you go. Before you can finish first you've got to finish, that old adage.
Yeah.
Right, but he absolutely instilled that. The car's got to get to the end. Reliability. You can be first for 99% of the laps, but if you don't cross the line on the last lap,
it
doesn't count. And that's exactly where Honda were with their great reliability. A couple of failures, but very, very few. And that's what we see today. And that ethos, as you've just described to us here, has spread right throughout the Honda road car division. It's reliability.
Yeah.
Well, it's a beautiful car.
Oh no, this is a prime example. I mean, an amazing example. The only thing I wish it was a manual, but in automatic form, it just screams to me Grand Tour. And you see, there's no short side of AC vents.
Yeah.
So they wanted you to be comfortable inside the cabin. First time that you see integrated buttons on the steering wheel. They had the whole Formula One cockpit design idea. So the stalks are here for the pop-up headlights. The cruise control buttons are here. The hazard. Got to be one of the most weird and overly complicated hazard buttons I've ever seen on a manufactured car. But there it is. And you know, Honda would flash the high beams. But look, back in the day, the other cars that had pop-up headlights would just have a little light somewhere else.
Yeah.
Honda would pop them up, flash you, and leave it there, and then brought down by itself. They thought of the daily
really
drivability
did.
of the car.
When you open the door there, I was instantly reminded, you just mentioned Pininfarina earlier on, we've mentioned Ferrari, the 328, 308. The inside of that door, to me, is very similar to a 328.
Yes.
Isn't it?
The door card, or the 308 and the 328, they all very much that door card right there.
Very similar.
But they wish they would have had passages for the AC to actually go through. You've got the froster up here, you've got nice side ones there.
Yeah.
And you know,
I'm guessing the AC actually works and blows cold air.
Freaking frigid. Like every other Honda or Acura that you think of, you know?
Yeah, unlike some Italian marks that will go unnamed in this video.
Steve, one of the things I love about this car is very 90s. You've got your handy dandy phone.
Wow,
if you want to make your
cool?
phone call. And here's the voiceover one. So if you want to answer your phone while you're on speaker, here it is. I mean, who in the 90s had wireless phone technology?
State of the art.
I could just see somebody taking a very important lawyer phone call. Oh, don't bother me. I'm on my phone call.
Thank you for sharing this car with me today.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. And I love hearing your roots. I mean, everything in life is some degree of connection. And you were there on your first race, your first win.
First race win with Benetton, and that was, again, a direct result of Senna. This car owes so much to Senna's input, and most definitely I can understand exactly when you're describing Honda's concern over flexing of the chassis. We need to make the car stiffer, we need to make it more reliable. That's 101% Formula One ethos right there. The credo of Formula One is, it's very easy to make a reliable car, but it's slow. And it's very easy to make a fast car, but it's unreliable. So what you're trying to do is mesh somewhere in between the two. You're trying to hit that delta line between performance and reliability. You need the car to be fast, it needs to be reliable enough to cross the finish line on the last lap. If it breaks down on the cool down lap, we don't really care. The car's done, but don't break down on the lap before. So yes, you're looking at those two lines of reliability and weight and all that stuff. And when they come together, that's as best as we're going to get. And I think this represents Honda absolutely meeting those two goals. Lightweight car, good performance, but as you keep saying, reliable. The reliability is there on the car. So it's got an incredible service record.
Yeah, that's what their homage was, their omen about.
Yeah.
And this example just shows you a little bit of that, and we're happy to be showcasing it here at Euro Prestige Imports. Cue that Ayrton Senna footwork, baby. Thank you guys for watching.
Yeah, done. Right, all right, our contract is over. Get in the plane and take me away.
My 30,000 square foot heated and climate controlled Ferrari, Porsche, storage facility. He's Cyrus, don't be rude.
That oil, Marcel, is so rare and precious, we can't afford to put it in the past.
Sorry to stop you from your flight.